Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on to today's live presentation with Andy Headworth. Delighted you can join us this afternoon. And what we've done for today's session, some of you will have been on our live Q&As before. We like to try and field whatever social media challenges, whatever candidate sourcing, social recruiting frustrations you're facing. We like to try and field those questions live for you. But we like to introduce things by having an expert on the topic share a few ideas of a Friday to give you some things to think about for the future. And I'm delighted that we're joined today by Andy Headworth. And lots of you on the call will know Andy, I'm sure. I have certainly learned a great deal from Andy over the years and very appreciative of all the input I've had from Andy. And for those of you who haven't read his book, Social Media Recruitment, very well worth a look. Do have a look up on Amazon afterwards if you haven't read that already. But Andy, if I could welcome you onto the call. Can you hear me and can we hear you?
I can, and thank you, Tony, for inviting me this afternoon. Looking forward to it. And hello, everybody. I'll do an intro in a second. There's a picture on the screen there. Actually, one of the 6 things I learnt about when you write a book and it becomes popular and people want to talk to you about it is they get you to sign autographs in a book, which if you're not natural for that sort of thing, it does get very awkward. So it's quite funny when it started to happen. But a very brief introduction. If you don't know me, I'm sure many of you've seen my social content over the web over the years. But my background and my passion is recruitment. That's the #1 thing. The social aspect came along about 6-7 years ago, and so I work with companies helping them with their recruitment strategy, social recruiting, and you name it. And there's the image of the book that I wrote last year. So when Tony asked me to do this, I thought the easiest thing on a Friday afternoon is, rather than prattle on with loads of great tips and things, we'll cover those during the Q&A. I thought I'd just talk about 5 different case studies, or 5 companies that I spoke to when I was writing the book, and just a few of the different things that came out from talking to those companies. So the first one is, and this is a real flavour of the moment, and I think it's really important for companies, is user-generated content. You know, UGC has becoming an anachronism for it. And probably my favourite case study in the book is of a restaurant chain, a family-owned restaurant chain in Canada called Earl's. And you can see the logo there and some of the staff. And the reason I like it so much is because it's all about the people. It's about people, their employees, and they've got 7,000 of them. They've been going 30 years. And the difference with Earl's is 85% of their employee base are millennials. So when Brenda Rigney, the VP of the people operations at the time, looked at trying to bring the recruitment together, she turned to her employees to help her do it. And they built a culture around their engaged workforce, and their workforce, you know, love working there, and so naturally become natural brand ambassadors. So then tap that into social media, and they use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and they got their employees to do their marketing for them, to talk about the brand, to talk about their experiences. They had various hashtags, one of them being my Earls, and they just got their employees to tell their story, and it's been really successful. If you look at any of their social channels, you know, it's just so refreshing. I actually went out to Canada 2 years ago and took Brenda a copy of the book over in Vancouver and met her and had the pleasure of actually going into some of their restaurants, of which that's one of the burgers I had. And it was exactly what she said it was. You know, the employees live their job, they live their brand, they love it. And that's something that genuine user-generated content you should be thinking about. The other one is in the other side of the world. So some of you might know what that is, what she's doing. I hope you do. That's called a Tim Tam, and you take the end off each of it and you suck a drink through the chocolate biscuit. Now, the company that make that is Campbell Arnott's, a different challenge altogether. So the reason I put brand on there is it was a problem, but it was also a positive at the same time. So any of you listening that have got an issue around a very, very popular brand, it's not always as easy to turn that brand into a recruiting brand, as some of you might know. So Campbell Arnott, about 3 years ago, they had 97% of all the households in Australia had their product in their house. Absolutely fantastic. But the consumer brand did not equal the employer brand. And that was their challenge. So they needed to look at their recruiting, and a couple of ladies called Kelly Tomney and Natasha Kolopy basically in 2013, I think, started from scratch. So some of you might be in this situation now. You just realised that social was for you. They had nothing to go on. They had a 97% brand in the consumer side, no employer brands to speak of, and they went about changing it. And they looked at, they sort of focused on 4 different areas. One, they were just telling everyone what a great place to work, and they looked at how they could do that, and they used all the different social channels. They then focused on their career site and made sure the stories were on the career site. And that's a real problem currently, actually, with companies, that they don't tell enough stories. They don't show people what it's like, whether in video, pictures, or the stories of the employees. So that was a big thing. They also invested in LinkedIn, using the talent brand index on LinkedIn, and that was their measurement tool, actually, to see how well they'd gone. And number 4, they made it personal. They made it personal, telling the stories, and got their employees to tell these stories, and got their employees to be brand ambassadors. So fast forward 2 years, all the recruitment is now done directly, direct sourcing, using social media. They don't use agencies. They cut the spend right down, and it's all done via social. Next one is going to be a surprising picture, because some of you might find it sexy, some of you might not. This I have to say, this one makes me absolutely laugh, because I was stunned when I did the research for this particular product, this company, and the program of work they did around Facebook. The more I looked, the more I realised there were some really super nutty geeks who love pictures of cranes and boats and ships and containers anywhere around the world, and that was just from their Facebook page. So basically, Maersk needed to recruit 3,000 people globally for their rigs and their drilling. And first thing they did was ask their employees. They asked all their rig workers, who I think 85% are offshore, what social channel do you use? A significant figure came back and actually said, well, we use Facebook. We talk to our colleagues, we talk to our peer groups, we talk to everyone, because while we're on a rig, there's nothing else to do. So they used Facebook as their primary channel for a recruitment campaign, and it's quite well documented with the Maersk project. They've won an absolute ton of awards over the last few years. But basically they used their EVP and told Maersk stories. They didn't post jobs on the Facebook page, they just shared everything to do with working for Maersk. Now, it showed the loyalty of the brand and the strength of the brand and the interest in working for the company because of their employer brand, that, you know, every single time they posted a picture, they were getting 80, 90, 100, 200, 300 comments on some of them. And within those comments, there were pictures sent in by, you know, as I say, cranes. Completely non-interesting to me, but they were getting really excited. But also they were asking about how they get work. How can they work on a certain ship? How can they work in a certain country? And of course the recruitment team would then deal with these. They'd direct them to the career page, and they'd process them. Very, very successful campaign. Successfully recruited all of them. And a sub campaign that came out of this, which was really interesting, was that the wives and the partners wanted their own community outside their partners on their primary Facebook. And so Maersk did a campaign then and set up a separate Facebook page and route for the partners of the people on the rigs, because they realised actually they're very influential in work choice, selection and contracts. So again, completely different but fascinating. Some of you may have seen me post this, I've blogged about it, I've spoken about it over the last couple of years. This is just brilliant. You know, this is a classic example of, we've got so much fantastic stuff in the social web online around us that people don't think about using from a recruitment perspective. You know, social networks are, in my mind, you know, they're the biggest people databases that you can mine and source and engage with. But what my friend did in Sweden, Andre Hellstrom was a recruiter. He used to recruit technical developers for Spotify. He knew what these guys did. They sit there and they code and they've got headphones on, they're listening to music, listening to Spotify and other stuff. So what he did was, very cleverly, he used the free product of Spotify, he built playlists and he sent them the links to all the targets of the candidates that he wanted to engage with. Now if you look at that screen there and you go down the left hand side and look at the titles of the jobs, sorry, the titles of the songs, you know, this is what it comes out like. You know, it's hi, my name is Andre, I'm a ninja headhunter. Believe it or not, I'm searching for candidates who want to live forever. And maybe join the band. Are you happy with your current job situation? I'm looking for 4 programming cowboys. Maybe you are enveloped in Python, Java front end. So tell me, who are you? Hopefully you're the one number code monkey I'm looking for. Show me you are passionate, I'll show you Spotify. Best regards, Andre. Quite unsurprisingly, it got a response. It worked. He was getting to reach these guys and girls that you just couldn't get via email. Now this is just one version. This is his plain version that he shared with me. He has a whole stack of others that he uses when he's doing specific headhunts for certain people. But basically this took him 20 minutes to do. He figured out what he wanted to say. He then went and found the song titles that he could put together, created a playlist, and it's free, and he shared it. So again, he knew exactly who his audience is. So the message for me is really understand your candidate audience. If you understand where they are, what they're interested in, what they're doing, you have a much better chance of engaging with them and you know, having success on social. The last one is it's not about socks, it's about Twitter and television. So again, really obvious but clever use of the second screen. So many of you will have heard that the second screen nature that's been talked about for the last 2 years. And all this means is a television and a laptop, iPad, iPhone, whatever the device is that you're using while watching the television. So Anson people had a challenge or asked by Raymond Blanc Cookery School to help them recruit a head chef to head up this cookery school in Oxford. Now the problem they'd been looking for 6 months to try and find someone. They'd been placing adverts everywhere, no success whatsoever. So they turned to Mark and his social team. And so what they did was they did some research and found out, no surprise, that chefs are on Twitter because they're always busy, they're on their phones, and Twitter is a channel they like to use to talk to each other. So there's a whole stack of them on Twitter. And number 2, the second part to that is they actually watch cookery programs. You think they'd have enough of it, a bit of a busman's holiday, but they do those 2 things. So what they did was they had a program coming up. Raymond Blanc had a 6-week program coming up on BBC 2 called The Hungry Frenchman. They knew, obviously, that chefs would be watching that because it's Raymond Blanc. So what they did was they set up it was on BBC 2 running for 6 weeks on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. They set up a number of hashtags. They obviously did their pre-television program research and outreach to a number of people, telling them they're going to engage with them. The hashtag was on the screen because it was a TV program, and they started using hashtags. And they basically, half an hour before the program, during the break, and then after the television program, so it must have been ITV Channel 4, they engaged on the hashtag, talking about the program, what people liked, what they didn't like, and then every batch of so many tweets, they slipped in a one-liner saying, you know, we're looking, if you're interested, you know, make contact with us and we'll have a conversation offline. Very successful. Bear in mind they couldn't recruit for 6 months. By the end of that, the series, they'd had a whole stack of applications from people who had tweeted them, and ironically, the successful person that got the job actually DM'd the team halfway through that first episode in the advert break and engaged with them straight away. So, you know, Twitter is a fantastic tool if you use it in the right way. Most people think about job posting and sourcing, but actually it's the the level of engagement you can get from such a wide variety of people make it a fantastic tool for recruiting. So that's the 5 stories. I'm hoping you've got a load of questions that Tony can ask. So as with always with social, you can get me on every channel if you wish to reach out. But hopefully now you've got some challenges and issues that you'd like some help with from Tony and myself, and we can hopefully share some of our wisdom over the next half hour or so.
Andy, thanks ever so much for that. Really, really interesting stuff. For those of you who came onto the call a little bit late, you should see over on the right-hand side of the screen that there's a question area where you can submit through questions for Andy and I to come back and respond to live during the remainder of this call. So please don't be shy. Fire through whatever challenges you're facing, whatever questions you'd like us to tackle. Do send those through and we'll get through those as best we can. I thought it was fascinating, Andy, just picking up on the sort of personality and the fact that all these companies are trying to get their personality and get the individuals within the company involved in their recruiting on social. And it's not about blasting out messages and promoting all the time, but it's actually about people buy from people. People, trust other people, and how can you achieve that with social media? So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I think stage further, Tony, is just to say that what people don't realise is the best people that can tell future employees what it's like to work there are not the marketing director, not the recruiter, it's the employees doing that job. And that's what a lot of those companies, just basically tapped into.
Absolutely. So I had some questions emailed through before the call and seen 1 or 2 come through already here now. First one, Andy, I wonder if you've got some thoughts on this, is how do you go about deciding which social sites your company should actually have a recruiting presence on? So how do you research where your target audience are actually hanging out, where they can be best engaged? Any thoughts on that particular challenge?
Yeah, yes, and every single company needs to do this, no matter whether they think that they're doing it right or they're just about to start. The first thing really is to actually take one step backwards and understand what your target audience actually is and what they look like. I talk a lot about building personas. It's a marketing trip of actually fully understanding what the audience is, where they are, what their interests are, what their skills are. Then once you've captured all that information, is then trying to decide on the social networks. So, start with the main profiles of the social networks. The easiest ones, we start with LinkedIn, we look at Twitter, we look at Facebook, and use the information you've mapped out in your persona to identify and search for those people on the different networks. And there's an element of, it takes a bit of research, as you know, Tony, yourself, to find the right one. But don't always go for the most obvious social networks. Just because Facebook is the biggest doesn't mean that your candidate audience are actually, they might be on there, but they may not be a site that's engaging. And if you're recruiting, the standard ones in the IT space are, it's GitHub and Stack Overflow. If you're in the creatives, it's Dribble and Behance. There is loads of social networks. It's just a question of, as long as you know what you're looking for, as long as you know the core skills, the keywords, the interests that those people have, and you have a good understanding. And I would say if you don't have an understanding, go to the people in your company that are doing those jobs and sit down with them for 20 minutes for a coffee. They'll give you a great insight to the type of profile you need to find. So a bit of research and some hard work, but it's worth the effort.
Absolutely. I think something I always recommend to people as well, Andy, is to set up on each social site as if you were an advertiser. So go through the process of creating an advertising account and then create yourself a draft advert and at a certain point in the process, the social site will then ask you to narrow down what are the demographics of people you'd like to reach. And if you go through that step, you then obviously for each site can see, in your particular geographical area and with the demographics that you're targeting, are these people on this site and available to be reached through this channel or not? And certainly that's something I do to quite often bump up against situations where companies will say, oh, I don't believe that our type of candidates use Twitter, or we only deal with at the senior end of the market, and those people just aren't on Facebook. And very often, if you go into that demographic data as an advertiser, you can prove the polar opposite.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And also, I use the same principle. I use the Facebook search tool that is one of the Chrome plugins, and I do the same thing when when I'm with a client there and then in the office with them, when they ask that question, where are our people, and we just throw some searches and actually show them, so they actually believe you, because they don't necessarily always think that you're telling the truth when you talk about social media sites. So it's very true. That's a good way of doing it.
Okay. There was a question through from Jason that was asking, in terms of, as we were just talking about Facebook specifically sourcing, do you recommend using a separate personal page for sourcing on Facebook, or do you recommend using your own accounts? Any thoughts on best practice there?
Best practice or legal practice with Facebook, that's the question. For all of you who don't know what I'm referring to, technically you can't do that on Facebook. You're only supposed to have your own account. So they don't like having duplicate accounts. And if they found it, they'll close it down. So there is that to it. I mean, it's a really good question, Tony, because some companies will not let their recruiters use it. So I think that depends who you're working for. But I would say, if you are going, and this applies to, if I can just answer that in a slightly different way, when I deal with, when I talk to recruiters and work with recruitment teams, one misnomer, one thing that is just not clear sometimes is, when you are going to start using social per se for recruiting purposes, and you are a recruiter, and you might have 3 social profiles, you might have 7 or 8. Google is your friend and your enemy in that, because I've had the situation where a recruiter said to me, I'm only going to use Twitter and LinkedIn for my professional life, and the rest is all social. Well, Google, if you've set your profiles up with your name, Google doesn't see that. So, it will find you. So all a candidate's got to do is just put your name into Google, and it will throw up all the social sites, because they're all so well indexed. So to sort of half answer it is, if you are going to use social, then you need to be aware of all your accounts, not just that. But in terms of Facebook, I think it depends on how, shall we say, how active you are socially on Facebook. If you have a really group of, shall we say, eccentric friends or partying friends or whatever, and you've got a very active social life with a network that you do not want to connect to your work, and maybe contradictory to what your professional levels are at work, then absolutely you probably need to think about setting up a professional separate profile. However, if you're not and you're quite comfortable with that, I personally think that you should use your own one. I think candidates respond better to individuals, and to see that you are a real person, and that you're not a recruiting robot, and you're not one of the bad recruiters. So unless you've got something to really hide, or you don't want them to expose them to, tidy up your LinkedIn, so your Facebook profile, and use that to engage people. You'll have a better success rate, ultimately, I think.
I'd second that, Andy. I think I can think of a number of instances where recruiters have tried to be clever in their use of various social sites, and they've done things that contravene that site's rules, and you're basically living on borrowed time. You could build up a great presence for yourself on that particular platform, or you could have loads of messages out with candidates, and you come into the office the next day and you find that account's been closed down, and the amount of asset that you should have had in your business, your recruitment team, that you lose overnight when that happens, in my view, is just not worth the risk. And as Andy says, in the case of Facebook, it contravenes their terms of use to have multiple accounts up and running with them anyway.
Yeah, and just taking that one from Jason a stage further then, and as we talk about over the next 6, 12, 18 months, as we start moving into we're on social networks, the biggest growth areas are the whole messaging platforms, so iMessage, Messenger, WhatsApp, etc. I personally think that you've got so much more chance of actually engaging someone on Messenger cold if it's your own personal account that looks like you, has got all your own personal stuff on, has your pictures of your friends, and you're being normal rather than a cold, professional-looking recruitment account that then tries to message someone. It's just going to bounce and be blocked. And I think the more personal and human you are, then that's going to play on for the next 6 to 12 months as we move more and more into messaging people and engaging via the dark social, as it's called, as opposed to emails and emails. So
absolutely. And I had a couple of questions through from Ian as well, Andy. The first one was around the best times to actually engage candidates on social media. So have you seen any patterns or found any way of researching the best times to be trying to engage with candidates via social?
Yeah, two answers to that. One, completely depends on your audience. So whoever his particular audience is, I'm not aware of. But so the first thing is there's the obvious. I'll give you an example of one of my clients at the moment. So they're in the construction sector. So we did some homework last year where we were trying to reach out to them. So their clients are all on a construction site. So construction site's open at 7:30, there's tea break at 10:30, lunch at 12:30, site finishes at 4:30. Tea break and lunchtime, you go into the canteen, first thing they do when they get in, they grab their tea and bacon sandwich or whatever they're having, they go straight on their phones. So obviously, if you know your audience, those times are good to engage people. But typically, I know, and it's there are tools you can use, but I think if you just go to human nature, early in the morning, lunchtimes, early in the evenings, after work in the evenings are good times to engage people on the way to work, while they're having a sandwich, on the way home in the evening. Job board data is a good analogy of this, and they mirror that information. But there are tools. You'll probably know better than me, Tony. There are a couple of good tools. Is it Manage Flitter and Buffer do it as well? Well, they'll take your social audience and they'll look at when your social audience is online. So, for example, if a lot of your audience is in America, there is no point posting social content in the morning because they'll be in bed. So it needs to be afternoon and evenings. If it's Australia, again, a different time demographic. So there are plenty of tools that will help you do that. The first thing is actually you should understand who your audience is. And if you've built it correctly, you'll have a good idea of the times to engage.
And yeah, I'd really reinforce that message. I think it's all about thinking about your particular candidates and what their day looks like. So we'll talk with a lot of clients about the fact that a lot of people use social media on their mobiles. So when are people with their mobiles and with time to kill? So your commute into work in the morning, your commute home from work at the end of the day, your lunch hour, when you're traveling, weekends, these are times you're likely to be on things like Twitter and Facebook. Whereas if you're trying to reach people on LinkedIn, they're much more likely to be on LinkedIn during the working day, particularly if you're targeting the types of candidates that would actually use LinkedIn for their job. So it's all about thinking about your candidates and and trying to figure out what they would be doing. I'm always slightly wary of these best time to tweet and best time to whatever tools, because they're based on data sets that don't necessarily reflect when your ideal candidates are likely to be most likely. Let's say, for example, they might show you that 5:15 is the best time to tweet or Facebook, because that's when everyone clocks off of work and jumps on the tube and therefore has time to kill and they're on their phone. But actually, if the highest performers in your industry tend to work a bit longer and tend to not leave till 7 o'clock, then if you put all your effort into 5:15, you're actually not targeting the high achievers in your industry. So I'm always a little bit wary of using those tools without putting some intelligent thinking behind that as well.
Yeah, and just taking that the stage further, if the good thing about social and that is where it is now as to where it was a few years ago. the main sites, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and all of them do this, they do provide good analytics. So, you know, the trick to all of this with any marketing or any engagement is, you know, do it for a few weeks and look what's being, you know, look at the analytics, look at the insights, and actually see what's being engaged with when. So I know for a fact from all the stuff that I share 7 days a week, that across all the channels, I know that Saturday morning and Sunday evening appeals to certain types of content. I'm not going to share that with you, obviously, because you'll all do the same thing. But it works, you know, from my perspective, I know that I get the sort of like over the weekend, Saturday morning and about 7 to 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening, actually is really good engagement time, because people have got time on their hands, as Tony was saying. They get up, they sit there having a coffee and their breakfast, figuring out what to do on the Saturday, and then on Sunday night, it's very active on LinkedIn, and this is borne out by LinkedIn data and other job board data. Is that, you know, 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock on a Sunday evening UK time, it's very positive. A lot of people are starting to think about going back to work the next day and thinking getting into work mode. So, you know, again, know the platform, but also know your audience.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Andy. And a follow-on question from Ian related to that is any hints or ideas on sources of content or types of content that you've seen are better for engaging candidates than others? Any particular trends you've noticed?
Right, other than the traditional, everything that we're learning about for the moment. So anything with an image on, image and video get the best engagement if it's relevant, again. But it comes back to one of those slides, and it comes back to the slide I showed earlier from Andre on Spotify. You know, he really knew his audience, and he knew what they liked. And when we talk about content strategies, it was Ian, you really have to, you know, understand who they are and what they like. And there are so many sources of content to select from. If you go to my blog on there, I wrote a post about this this week, actually, it went out yesterday, cover this exact subject. There's a great tool called Feedly. It's a curating and aggregating tool. Use that to go out and find loads of different types of content, and then it's a question of figuring out what you get engagement with. But it has to be relevant, it has to be interesting. If you think it's boring, if you think they're not going to like it, don't just post it for the sake of it, because it's just a complete waste of time. So there are so many sources. You can use Pulse on LinkedIn, you can use Flipboard to aggregate and find content, Feedly, you've got Google blog searches is a great way of finding content. It's unlimited amounts of content out there. You're just going to know what you're looking for, really. And don't forget YouTube either. YouTube is absolutely superb for finding content to share.
Absolutely, would definitely second that. A couple of additional points I'd make on that, Andy. Firstly, just going back to the point about candidate engagement, I think one thing I would stress is you don't have to reply to candidates or indeed you know, potential clients, you know, instantly on social media. We generate a lot of interest from being active, you know, as Andy was talking about, 7 days a week throughout the time periods that your target audience would be active. You know, and someone may comment on something or retweet something or whatever, and we might not see that and act upon it, you know, until the next day. So you don't have to generate results on social media. You don't have to be pouncing on every piece of engagement, you know, the moment that it happens. I think it's more important that you saturate your profiles in the sense of, you know, you are on those channels enough to be noticed. And you know, if you take Twitter as an example, you know, if you're only tweeting once a day, then you're kind of not on Twitter, because for most hours of the day, people on Twitter just aren't ever going to see you. So I'd rather do a great job of properly saturating the hours that you want to be tweeting, rather than getting hung up on, you know, 6 to 8 o'clock's the best time, so I must concentrate, you know, as much of my best content then as possible. Yeah, that'd be the first thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say, across all of the clients that we work with, and those of you who aren't familiar with social are on the call, so we build social media presence for recruitment teams and recruitment businesses. And I would say across all of them, posts that where the introduction by the person shares a little bit of personality, shows a little insight into their business or something, some human touch, goes a long way. And some of the posts that I can think of that have done best, are where people have shown a little bit of frailty or made fun of themselves or a mistake that they made, that's talked about in this article. Sharing the article on its own wouldn't have generated much interest, but the fact that they gave a little personal story when they shared it, a whole load of people jump in and comment on that, and therefore the whole reach of that message becomes much greater on social. Does that ring?
I agree with you completely, Tony. I was going to say also is when you share content, don't ever just share content and leave the title of the blog post article. If you don't like it, change the title, because you can in the tweet or the update, but also add a quick why you like it, why you read it. So just taking what you stage further and acknowledge that you have read it, liked it, or I did one today. There was something to do. I don't know what it was. 20 things to do in an office, and you just like, okay, well, I liked 2 and 4. What do you like? So it's that personal touch to a piece of content as well as the content you share.
And I think that brings us to the point that social media, more than anything, is a way of interacting and having conversations with other people. So the more you treat it as a means of broadcasting things, the more you're failing to exploit actually the single biggest power that social media gives to you.
Absolutely. So we're doing social media. We're in the land of the millennials. Why haven't you got a question about Snapchat then, Tony? What have you? Because I'm sure that someone has asked about it.
No questions about Snapchat, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. I think it comes back to the audience. I can give a really good example this week of a client that sits smack in the demographic of that audience. They're the young, sort of 16 to 21-year-olds. We know that's where they're at, and they engage. I think Snapchat's update this week makes it quite interesting because they're allowing you to then store and save stories, images, etc. So that was always the problem, because you could do stuff on Snapchat, it would disappear, obviously. I think as an engagement, a one-on-one engagement, a way to show your culture, show your people, it's a fantastic tool. There are some companies that are using it very well. I really like the geo filters on it. I think that's the clever bit. If companies are being a bit clever, if any of you know what I'm talking about with regards to Snapchat, if it's going over your head, I apologise, but if you have an idea what I'm on about, have a look at the geo filters on Snapchat. So let's just hypothetically take a situation where you are going to a conference, an event, or a location. It might have a shop in a certain location. So for example, a top retailer like Primark or someone like that who's got a store in Oxford Street, or any one of the retailers there, they might have a Snapchat geo filter for a half-a-mile circumference of the store, and you literally can draw that on the screen and have a promoted filter that then sits on Snapchat if anyone uses it. And bear in mind, a lot of the fashion retailers, this is absolutely in their audience, and then they can do some really clever things with it. So again, it's thinking of engagement and engaging an audience rather than specifically recruiting them. So it's just continual engagement with your audience and let them see what you're about. Show them your employer brand. Show them the fun you can have and the fact you are real people. You're not just doing it for the sake of it. So I think it's a really cool tool as long as you know your audience. Don't try and do it to the Middle Ages like you and me, Tony. It probably won't wash. We won't use it. But if the audience is young, if the audience is in the right space, I think there's so much potential there that you can use it for. But you've got to have the right people using it. And as I said, this client I've got at the moment who are targeting that demographic, they're actually going to go out and we're going to hire a young person of that same age group, and they're going to get their Snapchat account, and that's going to be their job. because it's all about engagement for them, because that then puts them in the mindset of the people using the platform. So yeah, if that answers the question, I'm not sure, but sort of.
Terrific. Well, Andy, I think that brings us to the end of the questions we've had through. If anyone has any others that they'd like us to tackle, please do fire them through now. But in the meantime, I'll just point out again Andy's contact details there on the left-hand side of the screen. So if you've got any follow-on questions, do connect with Andy there on LinkedIn, or fire him a tweet across on Twitter, and myself at Tony Restell on Twitter. Very happy to help with follow-on questions as well. So I think that's probably us exhausted for today, Andy. Thanks ever so much for your time. Been really, really interesting, and we'll be compiling a video of this and putting that out as a blog post early next week. So if there's any colleagues you want to share these insights with, you're very welcome to do that. Okay.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tony.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye for now.